The night she slipped into his cabin, she carried nothing but fear and frost on her skin. He reached for a rifle and instead found a reason to open his door again. Out on the silent frontier, two wounded souls were about to change each other's fate without meaning to. John Mercer returned to his cabin later than usual. The last blue light of evening fading into a hard, brittle cold that promised a bitter night ahead. His shoulders throbbed from a full day spent clearing storm debris along the north fence where a fallen pine had crushed the line, and even his horse moved with weary reluctance as he guided it toward the lean-to beside the cabin. The animal gave a low snort and nudged his sleeve before lowering its head to drink, and John paused long enough to run a gloved hand along its neck, murmuring a quiet reassurance meant as much for himself as for the beast. He had chosen this life of isolation. At 38, silence suited him better than conversation ever had. Years earlier, while serving as a scout for the Territorial Patrol, he had made a single decision during a raid. One wrong call that cost innocent people their lives. He never spoke of it, but it followed him like a second shadow. Since then, distance had become his form of penance. He kept to his land, fixed what broke, avoided trouble, and steered clear of anything that might demand more from him than he felt fit to give. When he stepped inside the cabin that night, he expected the same stillness that greeted him every evening. A lantern burned low on the table, spreading thin gold light across the plank floor. He shut the door against the cold, brushing snow from his coat, already thinking about heating water for coffee before turning in. Then he felt it, not a sound exactly, more a shift in the air, the faint disturbance that comes when someone moves under blankets. His body went rigid. His hand drifted toward the rifle prop beside the stove, but he stopped when he heard it, a shaky breath, thin and uneven. He turned his head slowly toward the bed. A young woman lay curled near the center of it. Long black hair spilled across the pillow. What remained of her clothing was torn and barely covered skin reddened by cold. She clutched the thin sheet to her chest as though it were armor. Her face showed a level of exhaustion that bordered on collapse. For a moment she said nothing, watching him the way a cornered animal studies the space between itself and danger. John didn't move closer. He stood where he was, taking in every detail, the tremor in her shoulders, her bare feet mottled by frost, the tight way she drew her knees in, as if still fleeing something close behind. She couldn't have been more than her early 20s, worn thin by fear rather than years. Finally, her voice came out in a fragile whisper. I followed a ritual for protection. A woman may enter a man's sleeping place if she's in danger. The words faltered halfway through like she didn't fully believe them herself. Her eyes stayed locked on him, ready to bolt if his tone changed or his stance shifted. John knew enough of Apache customs to understand there was a sliver of truth in what she said. But the panic in her gaze told the real story. This wasn't ceremony. It was desperation. He removed his gloves slowly and set them on the table, making every movement deliberate, visible. You're freezing, he said, voice low and steady. Warmth comes first. Explanations can wait. She didn't answer. Her eyes searched his face, trying to read whether he was a threat. John walked only as far as the foot of the bed, careful, controlled. He picked up the thick quilt folded there and opened it gently. She flinched at his nearness, though he never reached toward her. He laid the blanket along the mattress edge and stepped back at once, leaving the choice to her. After a few seconds that stretched long as rope, she dragged the quilt around herself with tight, urgent hands. Her breathing eased by small degrees. Her gaze dropped and she went quiet, like she was guarding the last of her strength. John felt an old, unwelcome pull in his chest, the weight of responsibility he usually avoided. He hadn't been looking to rescue anyone. He didn't know who she was, where she'd come from, or why she'd stumbled into his bed half-dressed in winter. But sending her back out into the dark would echo a mistake he had already paid for once. He pulled a wooden chair near the stove and sat with his back to her, facing the firebox so she could see he meant to give her space. It was the only way he knew to show she had nothing to fear from him. He listened as her breath shifted from sharp, panicked pulls to slower, uneven draws as warmth reached her. Time stretched. A gust of wind rattled the shutters and she jerked upright. Without turning, John said evenly, "Just the wind." His tone stayed level, an anchor in the dark. Her reaction told him more than any story could. Whatever or whoever she had escaped had driven her past clear thought. She stayed awake longer than he expected. At one point she asked softly, "You want me gone?" "Not tonight," he answered. The sound she made afterward was almost disbelief. The quilt rustled as she tried to settle. He noticed the stiff way she moved, the hand that hovered near her ribs like something there ached. Questions crowded his mind, how far she'd run, who might be looking, but he knew she didn't have the strength to answer them yet. When pale dawn light began to seep into the sky, John stood and stretched his sore back. He poured warm water into a tin cup and carried it toward the bed, stopping well short of her reach. "Drink," he said.
"It'll help."
She pushed herself upright slowly, still wrapped in the quilt. Her hair slipped over one shoulder, and she brushed it back with trembling fingers. Even as she reached for the cup, her eyes never left him. She sipped, then again, and faint color returned to her cheeks. "What's your name?" he asked. "T," she whispered. He nodded once. "Rest, T. We'll talk when you're steady." She studied him a long moment in the half-light, weighing whether to trust a man she barely knew. At last, she gave a small nod. John went back to the stove, opening the draft.
Warm air rolled into the room.
And for the first time that night, the tight knot in his chest loosened slightly. He didn't know what came next, but he knew this much. Whatever had chased her wouldn't reach her easily under his roof. And for the first time in years, the part of him that protected instead of destroyed stirred awake. T lay back down, clutching the quilt, while John kept his quiet watch until sunlight finally edged over the horizon. Morning light filtered through the narrow window, a pale strip across the floor that showed floating dust and the damp trail of melted snow near the door. The cabin still held dawn's heavy hush, broken only by the soft crackle from the stove, and the faint rustle of tea shifting under the blanket. John rolled up his sleeves as he built up the morning fire, moving with care not to startle her. He added split wood, waited for the flames to catch, and glanced toward the window. Grey sky, clear enough. He'd have a few hours before the next weather rolled in. Behind him, T pushed herself upright, holding the quilt close. She looked around the room, as if confirming she truly was here, not back in whatever place she'd fled. The silence between them felt different now, less frantic, more cautious. John poured another cup of warm water. "You should drink again," he said without turning. "No command in it, only patience." She took the cup in both hands. Steam curled between them. She didn't drink right away, just looked at the floorboards, the stove, his coat by the door, mapping the space. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said, voice clearer than the night before. "The wind made it hard." "Storm's past," he replied. "You'll warm up." She set the cup down and wrapped the quilt tighter. Morning light revealed she was still worn, but no longer on the edge of collapse. She brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You didn't ask why I came." "You weren't ready to tell," he said, fastening the stove latch. Her gaze drifted to the door, tension returning. "I left people who won't be happy I'm gone." "Close?" he asked, calm, practical. "I don't know. I ran until I couldn't feel my legs." Her hands trembled faintly. He recognized the look, someone who had pushed beyond endurance. He didn't press. What she held back mattered more than what she'd said. No one ran half-clothed into freezing dark without reason. He took a folded shirt from a shelf, worn but clean, and set it on the bed's edge. "It's not much. It'll help until we find better." She hesitated. Taking a man's clothing could mean many things where she came from. But his expression held no expectation. Slowly she took it. "Thank you," she said, then slipped behind a hanging blanket to change. John stepped outside to give her privacy. The cold hit sharp. He scanned the tree line, listened, only wind in the pines. Near the trough he noticed faint tracks, older than last night's snow, but enough to note. Someone had passed through before. He stored that thought away. When he went back in, T stood near the stove, his shirt hanging loose on her. She looked steadier, though she kept her eyes low. The quilt lay folded neatly on the bed, her quiet way of showing respect. "Eat," he said, nodding toward a small loaf of cornbread. She broke off a piece and chewed slowly. Hunger steadied her, but her gaze stayed far away. He weighed his next words. "I'll check the ridge. See if anyone followed." Her breath hitched. "You'll leave me alone?" "Not long," he said. "If there's danger, I'd rather know early." She stepped closer, uncertainty plain. "If you see tracks, what then?" He tightened a strap on his gear. "I come back." That's all. Relief softened her shoulders. She moved to the window while he saddled his horse. Her hand rested on the frame. For the first time, she let herself look past fear toward land, sky, and the man who'd given shelter without asking anything in return. At the door he paused. "Lock it after me." "Keep the stove fed." She nodded. "I'll wait." He closed the door gently, leaving her in the warm glow of the cabin that had become refuge. Before either of them spoke it aloud, the morning held a fragile steadiness. As he walked into the cold, T watched from the window, knowing whatever came next would shape the life she had no choice but to rebuild. Days turned into weeks, and the fear that had followed T across frozen miles slowly loosened its grip. No riders came. No smoke rose on the distant ridge. The land settled back into its old rhythms, wind through pine, creek water under thawing ice, fence posts creaking at dusk. John kept watch out of habit, but the tightness behind his eyes eased. T no longer startled at every sound. She worked beside him openly now, blending tack, tending the stove, planting early beans in a narrow strip of softened ground near the cabin wall. They spoke more. Little things at first, weather chores, the way the sky looked before snow. Then larger things slipped in between, shared without pressure. One evening, as sunset spilled gold across the valley, they stood on the porch shoulder to shoulder. "It's strange," T said softly. "I used to measure days by how far I could run." John glanced at her. "And now?" She laced her fingers together, steady. "Now I measure them by how long I get to stay." He nodded, understanding more than she knew. The cabin behind them glowed warm with lamplight, smoke curling steady into the calm sky. Neither of them had planned to change the other's life. But in the quiet of the frontier, they had built something stronger than fear, something worth staying for.